Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsey, a psychologist in Silicon Valley and the host of Super Psyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. Super Psyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. Regular listeners may have figured out this fact about me. I love exploring the pet-human bond. My life has been vastly improved by pets, and I've seen the same effect of pets on countless people. Recently, I watched a deeply engrossing Netflix original documentary called The Mind of a Cat. When I watched it and went nuts for it, like a teenager at a rock concert, I knew I needed to contact one of my favorite stars of the movie, Dr. Kristyn Vitale. Kristyn is a professor at Unity College in Animal Health and Behavior, and she is a frequent contributor to major media outlets like National Geographic and the New York Times, and she's a prolific researcher. The findings of her research suggest that cat behavior is far more complex than we may have ever imagined. So if you have ever wondered what is going on in the mind of your cat or how to best connect with your feline friend, these and many other questions will be answered. So listen in as Kristyn and I discuss the mind of a cat. Dr. Kristyn Vitale, who has asked me to call her Kristyn, welcome to Super Psych.
Well, thanks for having me.
It's such a pleasure.
Welcome to you as well.
Thank you so much. I do feel welcomed, Kristyn.
Good.
So I was loving your contributions on the Netflix special, as well as Saho's and the other great contributors. There was something about you and Carl that really captured my imagination, and especially the part about the fan, which we'll talk about later. But I was wondering, first off, people may be a little befuddled. What is a cat psychologist, if you were asked that at a cocktail party?
So it's really someone who studies and works with the behavior of cats. I mainly study cat social behavior as well as social cognition. So really, how socially intelligent are cats? What different factors might impact their behavior? How can we maybe change their environment to improve their behavior or improve their welfare? So that's really what I do.
And it's such an important topic from where I sit because cats are so misunderstood by me as well. I think I told you before we met that I'm a convert. I was previously a felinophobe. I did not love cats, and I'm a super felinophile now. I'm madly in love with cats, and I definitely consider myself ambidextrous when it comes to my love for both cats and dogs. I don't go binary and say I like one better than the other. And they both offer such different specialties. And I think one of the biggest problems that people may have is that they may try to treat cats like dogs and wonder why when they treat cats like dogs, they don't respond well. And I'm wondering, what are some of the things that people may misunderstand about cats? They've been vilified throughout history, as we know, and they're still vilified by many to this day who say dogs rule, cats suck. And what are some things that you would want people to understand about cats?
I think part of it is people just misinterpreting cat behavior or misidentifying it. So for example, one thing I'll hear, allo rubbing is a common cat behavior. So basically the cat will rub their head or their body up against a person or another cat or some other type of social partner. And I'll hear this assigning of negative intent to that behavior, like, oh, the cat's claiming ownership over you. They're trying to tell you they're in charge or they're dominant. But that's not really the function of an allo rub. It's more a behavior that occurs between individuals with a relationship, so bonded individuals. It's a friendly social behavior. And so it's not really about claiming I'm dominant over you or something. It's more about sharing of that bond. So I think that there's some of those behaviors that are attributed to being like things that are mean about cats, or like they're trying to control the situation, but dogs don't do that. But I think that's more about human perception than anything else.
You know, it's interesting how we can anthropomorphose, which is a fancy way of saying impose human or other characteristics on other animals. And that really leads to various cognitive biases around we extrapolate and project and we don't understand. And it was actually one of your colleagues who shared this, but I know that you understand this as well, is that you don't want to just come in and grab the cat, that predator animals like hawks out in the wild. I actually saw a wild cat that looked exactly like a house cat in Africa. And I was just like, oh my gosh, but they're out in the wild and they're not that different from house cats, that we want to come in slowly. What are some things that humans need to do well to basically show respect, love, and ultimately create a lasting bond with cats?
Yeah. One of the things you definitely hit on there is going slow, especially when going into a new relationship. You don't know how that other individual is going to react. So don't maybe just pick them up and grab them and manhandle them. Go slow, avoid reaching overhead, kind of just put your hand out, let them smell it, let them approach you. Also, an understanding of body language is really important. If you're attempting to interact with your cat and they're giving you signals of stress, things like putting their ears down, their eyes are dilated, their tail's rapidly twitching, those are all signals that you need to back off and give the cat some space. So being able to read your cat's body language and respond is a really big way that you can help create a stronger bond with them. It'll help create trust and it'll teach your cat that, again, you're somebody who can be a source of comfort and security for them.
And it seems it comes down to almost a form of respect. You're nodding on that one.
Yeah, definitely.
And that cats can perceive that on some level, perhaps even levels of respect being allocated to them. Given your knowledge of cat behavior, how would you translate the word respect, or what does that mean in catology?
I think a lot of it is listening to the animal and the boundaries that they're telling you, even though they're not speaking to you in English, they're telling you their boundaries through their behavior and body language. So when we see signs of stress, like I've mentioned, additional behaviors are like licking their lips or their nose frequently, swallowing frequently, shaking. Any of those things are very strong signals that your cat's not feeling comfortable. So a lot of it is just really about learning that language from your cat, finding those boundaries that they're defining for you already, and learning how to read those things.
That's awesome. And one of the things that cats have taught me, and so different from any other relationship I've had with other animals, is, and I'm wondering how you would even interpret this, I felt like cats taught me, as somebody who kind of leans towards extroversion, a capacity to introspect a little better and to find and even cultivate my inner purr, as I like to describe it. There was something that they taught me about really just being able to zone out in kind of a meditative fashion that was so helpful to my monkey mind. Yeah, you're smiling and laughing as I say this because it makes sense to you on some level, it sounds like. And I'm just wondering if you could speak to, what can cats teach us if we are willing to listen?
Well, I think patience for sure. I think that's kind of a trait of cats that sometimes the relationship might take a little longer to develop. And that's true for a lot of cats who have not been properly socialized. Dogs, a lot of the time, not always, but a lot of the time, are properly socialized. They're taken outside of the home. They're introduced to strangers, things like that. But cats don't really have that as much, at least in the US. Often they're only socialized to the one or two people in their homes. So I think that patience, that it might take a little longer, especially if they're not well socialized. It might take a little longer for them to trust you. And it's really, again, about going slow. You know, the first meeting, you don't need to pick the cat up and cuddle them. Put your hand out, let them come to you. But that's not to say some cats are not right off the bat going to be super bonded and wanting to sit with you, because it's very much about the individual cat. I think definitely in general, cats teach us patience. Some cats more than others, but I definitely think that's a trait we can get out of our interactions with them.
It's so funny as you're describing this, because the very first cat I ever had jumped out of the handler's hands and jumped onto my lap, gave me a nose kiss. I've never seen anything like this before. He was a Maine Coon. And what I'd like to ask you about is individual differences, that we know that animals are not necessarily all the same. They comport themselves differently, and we can't make sweeping generalizations around certain things. Certain things we can, and certain things we can't. And I was wondering if you could speak to individual differences, especially as they relate to cat selection. So if somebody's going to choose a cat, what might they look for? And what are the individual differences you've observed between cats?
Individual differences in cats has been something that since very much the beginning of working with cats, people have been seeing that really there is an individuality to cats that impacts their social behavior, their preferences, their interactions. And within my research, we have run a few different tests that have really highlighted this individual variation. For example, we looked at the sociability of cats and found that there is just a gradient. So there are some cats who are very highly social, basically spending the entire time that they could with the person. And then there are some cats who are less social, maybe spending no time or only part of the time with the person. And we see everything in between. So how social a cat is depends on the individual cat. But with that said, we do see some trends on average. So for example, in that same research, we found that on average, cats spent more time with people who paid attention to them rather than people who ignored them. Although we see differences individually in how much time they spent, overall, there are patterns in their behavior, especially in response to human behavior. Similarly, we ran preference assessments with cats and found that cats displayed different preferences. Some really enjoyed playing, some really enjoyed getting food or other toys. But again, overall, we found that 50% of the cats we tested most preferred a social interaction over other preferred items. So again, on average, we're finding social interaction to be really important. But again, it depends on the individual cat.
So they're not as aloof as we tend to conceptualize them to be. You know, one of the things that I've taken great interest in, especially around you, Kristyn, is that your work has been cited everywhere from Netflix to the New York Times, and you are really actively engaged in research. And you have a counterpart in Japan, at least one, maybe two, as we mentioned, and we see on the Netflix special. I'm wondering if you could describe some of the research findings that have given you the most joy or perhaps surprise or perhaps even corroborated what you always believed, but now there's empirical evidence.
I think basically those two studies I mentioned just now were really, again, highlighting that idea that cats are not as aloof as has even been presented in some of the literature on cat behavior. There's this idea that cats are skewed toward independence, but that's not what we're finding. And even we're finding it differs between populations of cats. So shelter cats specifically spend more time than pet cats with a stranger who's ignoring them. So that could be because they lack a consistent caretaker or consistent social interactions. So when they're presented with anything, they'll take it kind of thing, whereas pet cats can be more choosy. So that research really just goes, again, to show that cat behavior can really be impacted by these life experiences. So that's been really interesting for me to not only find that, but that they're not skewed toward independence. And in some cases, they're actually skewed toward being pretty gregarious. And then again, the attachment work is something that I've really been interested, something that's really fascinating to me. And finding that cats can form these strong attachments to people is something that has really been, it's not surprising to me, but that research has really stood out to me as being fascinating as well.
So I'm going to anthropomorphize a little bit here and extrapolate. As I mentioned earlier with you, Gregory Burns, who wrote How Dogs Love Us, it was interesting. He put these dogs into functional MRIs to see if their love centers were activated. And he found that some dogs were and some dogs perhaps were not. But one of the things that's asked in your Netflix special is, do cats love us? And Saho said that she hypothesizes yes. And I'm inferring from what you're describing and around attachment that perhaps they do love us in some way. I'm wondering, what would be your answer? Do cats love us?
Yeah, I think my answer was a little too all over the place for Netflix to include it, to be honest, because it's hard for me, like as a cat caretaker versus a scientist, do I feel that my cats love me from a caretaker standpoint? Yes, I do. But from a scientific standpoint, what does it mean to love? Love is a very complex emotion. Even in humans, people might say they love you, but their behavior is very different. So It can be hard to know. But I will say that one component of love can be this attachment of feeling comfort and security in your relationship. And we're seeing with cats that their owner or their caregiver, they really are an important source of comfort and security for their cat. When their owner is gone, we'll see that cats show separation distress. They're crying and searching for their owner. And then when the person comes back, they're calmed. They show a reduction in stress. And then they'll often go back to whatever they were doing while checking in with their owner. Yeah, I think that there are components of love that we're seeing within the research. But to say, yes, for sure, scientifically, we know cats love us in the same way that we define love, I have trouble making that statement.
You know, I'm really fascinated with attachment theory as it relates to humans. And you're speaking to that to some extent, that there may even be these kind of secure attachments, these anxious attachments, perhaps even avoidant attachment styles, to use the 3 basic food groups of attachment. One of the things that was so cool about having Yoda and Max, my 2 all-time favorite cats, who I just think about them every day. But when I would leave and when I would come back, I could see them in the window waiting for me. They could hear certain things, maybe the car or the sound of footsteps, and they would always give me a dog-like greeting. It was like, the king has returned. And I felt so important. I unequivocally felt loved by both of these guys. I mean, we were just bonded and inseparable, of course, until my wife came into the scene, and somehow he preferred her, as all animals do, which kind of sucks for me. But regardless, he still continued to love me. It's funny how that works. And I've been also interested in just the goofy behaviors that they can exhibit that have caused cats to be pretty much the number one YouTube hits. I believe 25 billion views, somewhere in that range on YouTube. And we get an oxytocin-like hit when we see these cats engaging in funny cat behaviors. I was wondering, like, you talked a little bit about the zoomies, which I think is like one of the funniest of the behaviors. At night, they start running around and getting the hunting mode. And we're just like, what is going on here? That's hilarious. What are some of the funny, heart-warming behaviors that are just hilarious, that may actually be serious to them, but funny to us as we see it?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. I just am thinking of like quirks of my own cats when I think of that. Because again, coming back to the individuality, cats develop certain quirks when they're interacting with you. And it's like, where did that come from? My cat, Kevin, he, without fail, if we sneeze, he'll meow at us. But we had a friend over the other day and he didn't do it to her. It's like he only meows at either my husband or I. So it's like this very interesting, quirky thing. So I think cats develop a lot. Yeah, isn't it funny? I think cats will develop a lot of these quirky interactions just through the relationship and through your day to day. And sometimes it's kind of like, where did that behavior come from? But then also cat play can be silly and fun. Sometimes people actually have trouble identifying cat play because sometimes it might look a little aggressive, especially if 2 cats are playing with one another. But I think it's all about, again, looking at the context. And most of the time they are just having fun unless you actually have true aggression happening. But I love watching my boys play. They'll wrestle one another. They'll flip each other on their backs. And it's like the best jiu-jitsu match or something. It's so interesting.
Well, the other goofy ones that a lot of cats seem to exhibit is going into paper bags or cardboard boxes, which I love. And it's kind of explained in your special, but I was wondering if you could talk to, like, the best toy that you could possibly get is the cheapest one. It's literally the paper bag, or using some tissue paper and they just can't get enough of that tissue paper or whatever it is. Can you explain why it is that they love bags and boxes?
Yeah. That is such an owner thing too, to a cat owner thing to experience. Like you buy them a brand new toy or cat tower and they don't pay any attention to that, but they're in the box or bag it came in.
What a great description.
Yeah. I think some of that is that as predators, cats are ambush predators. So they sit and wait for something to move and then they'll jump out and get them. Well, hopefully. So I think some of that has to do with their predatory motor pattern. I also think that there's a sense of security they feel when in enclosed spaces. And there's been some research with shelter cats that shows when they have a box or a space that they can hide in, that they will have reduced stress. So I think that it's both a little bit having to do with their play and their curiosity, as well as just making them feel comfortable.
Brilliant. And let's talk a little bit about cat physiology. I'm absolutely struck by it. It's been said that cats are in certain ways the ultimate hunters. You couldn't create a better hunter, and that our house cat has so much in common with the cheetah. He's awesome. I mean, this house cat can go like 30 miles an hour. That's a 2-minute mile. That's crazy. What are some of the things that make cats physiologically awesome?
The agility of cats, their small size, but strength. And one thing that one of the experts in the documentary talked about was that when cats jump, 100% of their muscles are activated when they engage in a jump or something like that. And they can jump a huge amount. I don't know the exact number, but
I think they said 6x times their height.
That makes sense. It's an insane
That would be like me jumping
amount.
36 feet. I would love to be able to do that. I'm not sure my knees would, but that's amazing.
And what's cool about cats, well, depending who you ask, is that their predatory motor pattern is fully intact. So with dogs, certain breeds, the predatory motor pattern has been bred out. So like a livestock guarding dog, you don't want them to go through the entire predatory motor pattern and end up killing the sheep. So different breeds of dogs have different levels of the predatory motor pattern intact, but cats have the entire thing. So that's fascinating from my point of view, but it's probably also part of the reason why you're not going to stop your cat from hunting, especially if they're allowed outdoors. They're probably going to be hunting. It's not something you can really control. But I find it fascinating that they are very much unchanged from the wild ancestor with some exceptions, but very much their genetics are still in line with their ancestor.
That is so cool. And you're saying that there's some things that cannot be trained out of a cat, but some things that can. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about training 101, so to speak. One of the things that you cover is that punishing cats does not work and that positive reinforcement does. I was wondering if you could speak to how do you train a cat out of maybe an unwanted behavior, let's say biting when they shouldn't, and maybe they're otherwise an awesome cat, but they nibble and you want to train that out of them, or something else, they're scratching furniture. How do you train a cat?
One of the biggest issues with punishment, well, there's a few issues, but first, you're often not teaching the cat what they should do. So you're telling them, don't scratch that, but you're not telling them that they should scratch this over here. So really the biggest thing is first giving them another outlet for that behavior, because often these quote unquote problem behaviors are just normal feline behaviors that are directed toward inappropriate things. So biting, that's a normal behavior, but it shouldn't be directed toward a person. Scratching is normal, but it shouldn't be directed toward the couch. So finding out what you can do to change a cat's environment to help redirect that behavior. With scratching, make sure they have scratching posts in the appropriate location. They have enough of them and they actually are preferring the material on the cat tower. And for biting, your cat might be a little bitey or mouthy. So give them some food puzzles or things like Kongs that are appropriate items that they are allowed to bite on. So it's all about really just figuring out another way to allow them to engage in that behavior towards something that's more appropriate.
That's awesome. And there may be a host of things that really contribute to predicting a cat's temperament. I've read some places that, Maine Coons tend to be a little bit more extroverted on average, as do the male orange cats. And I'm wondering if you could describe even some of the things that you covered. I mean, apparently where the cat's raised and live can really impact temperament. I was wondering if you could just speak to temperament and the factors that determine that.
So temperament and personality are intertwined, but they can be defined differently. So often I will define temperament as kind of those inborn genetic factors influencing individuality, whereas personality is kind of as you experience life, it builds upon that initial temperament. We know in kittens that already at a few days old, they're displaying individuality in their behavior. Temperament at even birth, they are predicting cats are differing. But then as they grow up, the life experiences they get really help shape that temperament. for example, socialization to people, cats are not born socialized to people, just like dogs are not born socialized to people. They must experience that during a critical point in their life, or else they'll never really be able to learn that humans are not something, they shouldn't fear us, they shouldn't run from us, and be able to develop proper social behaviors with us. So very much the life experiences are going to not only shape that individual's personality, but how they're interacting with other cats, with people, and with the world around them.
So that really brings me to a question that my 17-and-a-half-year-old son asked, because I sometimes will ask my family, hey, what should I ask? And he asked something that related perfectly to this. And how might the presence of another cat influence another cat's behaviors? Might me having brought home Miri to a house that already had a cat there, might they influence each other?
Absolutely. Again, it comes down to the individuals involved in the relationship. We've seen in other research that cats living in single cat homes versus multi-cat homes, there's not really a difference in stress other than it really appears to be an individual response. Some cats are stressed by living alone. Some cats are stressed by multi-cat households. There does seem to be a trend that younger cats are more stressed in single homes. So if you have a younger cat, it makes more sense to have a multi-cat home. But it really, again, comes down to the individuality of the cat. With your example, if your first cat had never been around other cats, had never experienced other cats, it's possible that introduction might not go very well versus a cat who's grown up with other cats and had that experience. They might be more willing to accept another cat. Now, that's not to say you can't take two cats who have never been around cats and introduce them. You can, but you need to go very slow. And again, be patient with it and go at the cat's pace.
Such a great point. Remember, the whole introduction process was somewhat long, laborious, and really required a lot of patience on everyone's part. One of the funny behaviors that cats exhibit is the whole making biscuits. That's kind of like where they're kneading on you. It's almost like they're playing the keyboard on your tummy or chest. I was wondering if you could speak to why adult cats continue that behavior, which I believe originates in childhood for expressing milk from the mom or something like that. Why is it that adult cats do this hilarious and adorable behavior?
One characteristic of domesticated animals in general is neoteny, or retention of juvenile characteristics. So we'll see that in some of the physical characteristics of cats and dogs, but also some of these behaviors that continue on from their infancy up into adulthood. One of those things is vocalizations. We see more vocalization into adulthood with domestic animals. We see retention of some of those juvenile behaviors like drooling or kneading or even aloe rubbing. What we're seeing, as I mentioned with the attachment research more and more, is that the cat-human bond is very much like a offspring-parent bond or a caretaker-offspring bond. It's very much about this caring relationship where we're taking care and loving the cat, but they're also viewing us as, again, that source of comfort and security and able to form that attachment.
I love that. So you as a cat psychologist, I have to ask, what are the questions you are most frequently asked, whether it's somebody on the street, at a cocktail party, wherever? What are the questions people ask you?
Can you really train a cat? Do cats really love you? Are cats social? Really just revolving around those stereotypes. Or it's less questions and more comments like, oh, I don't believe you can train a cat, or I don't believe that or this. I don't believe my cat wants to be around me. But it's interesting because I get that a lot here. But when I was over in Japan, I felt like people were very like, oh, that's interesting. Or I don't know if it was like a respect thing, that they were just more respectful in their interactions, or if it just surprised them less, because there is a lot more research with cat behavior going on in Japan. There's more labs focused on it than here in the US.
Why do you suppose that is? Why have the Japanese taken more scientific interest, perhaps, than we have?
I'm really not sure. I wonder if there's just less of that stereotype of dogs versus cats. That would be an interesting question to ask Saho if you ever end up interviewing her.
I sure hope to do so. And I know that cats recently overtook dogs in terms of ownership in Japan, and that they're somewhere around, there's like 600 million, 800 million cats worldwide. I mean, making them one of the most successful of all species, which is just phenomenal. Any other tips for keeping our cats healthy and happy?
Coming back to that individuality, as I mentioned, that research we did with the preference assessment, every cat is going to prefer their own thing. So especially if you're thinking about training, but even if you're not thinking about training and just daily interactions with your cats, being able to identify things that they really like can be really important in building that bond. I know what my cats like as far as toys or playing style or food. And I think that, again, just helps them have more fun when we're playing, helps enrich their lives by keeping them healthy and in a proper state of welfare. And I also think being able to analyze your own behavior and how that may impact your cat. So even if you're not actively training your cat, they're always learning from us. So analyzing, okay, well, why is my cat waking me up at 4 a.m.? I didn't teach them to do that. Well, if you wake up and feed them after they've woken you up, you kind of are training them to do that. So really analyzing why your cat is behaving the way they are based on either their environment or your behavior could be another way that you can help create that bond with them.
That is awesome. Well, one thing I need to tell you, just because it's just so funny to me, I came into my marriage with a cat and I had this funny conversation with my wife. I said something akin to, sweetie, this is not a deal breaker, but it would be amazing if you would be open to considering taking my last name. And she said, I'd be open to that. And she said, I do have one request. I said, what is it? She said, I'd like to change the name of your cat. I said, well, and his name was Flash at the time. And I said, well, what did you have in mind? And she said, Max. And I said, hello, Max. And it was a more fitting name. And he really did respond to it. And I love the fact that Carl responds to his name. And one of the things that you disabuse the viewers on your Netflix special of is that cats actually do recognize their name as opposed to other words. I was wondering if you could speak to that, as well as perhaps what their lexicon might be. How many words might they understand?
That was so fun in the Netflix special because we tried to see if Carl would respond to his name, and he did. And we were all joking like, oh, no one's going to believe that happened, but we didn't edit that. He really responded to his name.
Oh.
It makes sense. Again, coming back to this idea of the reinforcement history with the owner, if we say their name and then when they hear that word, they get pet, they get food, they get attention over and over, they're going to learn when I hear that, then I get something good. So they are able to pick up on words in their environment, even down to the point, I actually believe Saho's research just came out that showed this, but that cats can even tell the names of their companion cats in the house. So what they did was show the cat images on the screen of other cats they live with, and they either said the cat's true name or said the wrong name, and basically looked at the cat's reaction to these conditions. And they reacted more strongly when they put the picture up with the wrong name, indicating it violated what they were expecting.
That is bonkers.
It is. It's such a cool study, but it again goes to show that not only are they learning their name, they're learning the names of other cats in the house and who knows what else. I mean, training wise, we can introduce verbal cues all the time, ask them to sit, stand. So we don't really know what the upper limit of that is, but I think that they have a great capacity for being able to learn those things.
Beyond cool. And let's just imagine you just were the beneficiary of a massive grant. What would your dream study be?
I know what this is. It would be to go to Rome and study the free roaming cats at the Colosseum, or really anywhere in Italy or anywhere there's big groups of cats. But I've worked with free roaming cats in the past and just find their behavior so fascinating. And there's so much we don't know about cat relationships for these free roaming cats or how humans impact the behavior of free roaming cats. So really being able to go somewhere again overseas and do more research with cat groups, that would be like an ideal thing for me.
And what would you hope to discover and uncover in that process?
I think, again, really what factors are impacting their social behavior. We know things like the distribution of food, availability of food. These are all things that can impact their social behavior. But we don't know much about, again, the interactions that these cats are having with their caretakers. So a lot of the time, these free roaming cat groups are supported by colony caretakers. But how do those people and their interactions impact those cats as well as their interactions with other cats in the group? I think that's a really fascinating question. Can humans impact not only a cat's behavior, but their interactions with other cats? Someday I would love to study that.
That is awesome. We're getting to the end of our time, but I've got to ask, Kristyn, is there anything I should have asked but haven't yet asked you?
I guess just the potential of cats. I mentioned this earlier, but we treat dogs and cats very differently. But then we explain the differences between dogs and cats as this is just the way these two species are. Cats are this way, dogs are that way. But if dogs are socialized outside the home to strangers, if they go to dog parks, if they go to training classes and cats don't, is that really a fair comparison of the abilities of these two species? So again, coming back to this idea that a lot of what we think about cat behavior could just be our behavior impacting our cats. I guess the message here is don't let yourself be limited in what you think a cat should be like. Try training your cat, try interacting with them more socially and see how it goes. Some cats are going to be more receptive than others. But I think that in general, people, when they actually try initiating these relationships with their cats, are really surprised at the outcomes.
Kristyn, this has been a blast. And I guess, what was it like for you? A mere mortal, based on my assessment, just a real relatable human being to be so high profile all of a sudden on Netflix.
It was really cool. I had done a few documentaries before, had some of the press about some of my research. So I was used to getting a lot of contact, but this was very much like a different level. For example, on Instagram, I think I got like 1,000 new followers since the Netflix documentary came out. And I hear from owners all the time. They email me. I unfortunately can't respond to everybody, but just telling me their stories with their cats. So that's been a really cool outcome. Just, I think the amount of people who've been able to see it and it resonating with people and them wanting to reach out. So that's been a really great experience.
That's awesome. I guess the final question I have to ask is my miracle one. And that is, if you had the magical abilities to confer upon all humans, one skill or insight as it related to cats, or perhaps even what cats can teach us, what would that skill or insight be? And how do you imagine that would impact the individual as well as society at large?
I think being able to read body language and behavior would be the number one thing I would want. And not only because, as we mentioned, that can help create a healthier cat-human relationship, but some of these body language expressions are actually universal. So if you saw a dog or a person or a monkey all crouched down, small in a ball and shaking, we would probably know that means that they're fearful. So not only I think being able to give people the power of reading cat body language, I think that it would give them the power to read other people's body language, to read other animals, and hopefully increase the number of positive interactions or relationships they have with cats as well as other people and animals. So I guess that's what I'd have to say.
This has been a blast, Kristyn. Thank you so much for your insights, your wisdom, your just relatableness. And this has been way too much fun. I could talk to you for hours and I've been looking forward to this forever. So thank you for your time.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
Oh, rock on. This is Dr. Adam Dorsey thanking you for listening to Super Psyched. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe.